So the KAP has delivered a bill into Parliament that's based on the human rights of babies being born alive that up until recently in Queensland have been left to die on tables. So I read to the Queensland Parliament a number of stories yesterday. One of a baby born in Australia that was left to die in a medical waste bin while its heart was still beating, it was still breathing. Other babies in Queensland that have been left to die on tables in dark rooms. And that's 30 babies a year on average has happened in the last few years that we're observing them, letting them die. And I think on a human rights issue alone, we cannot let that happen. We cannot tolerate that in our state where we've got human lives breathing the same air that we breathe, sitting there with the health professionals around them and the care and the resources to keep them alive, and we deny them that right. They should be provided that right, and like anyone else in Australia, and we're here to put that into legislation now in Queensland and assure that everyone in Queensland supports those babies that are alive on the tables, are cared for, and the same way we all are cared for through our health system. I've brought with me advocate Dr. Joanna Howe from down South Australia, who's here to advocate on this issue and speak about it.
Thank you, Robbie. So I do want to thank Robbie Katter and the Katter Party for their courage in bringing forward this bill that would protect the human rights of all Queenslanders from the moment of first breath. So at the moment, these little babies fall through the cracks. If they are born alive after an abortion, they do not have a legislative right to care. So there's no legislative protection, which is why your bill is so important, Robbie. And so if we think about what this means, in the last 2 years that we have data for, 90 Queensland newborns were born alive and left to die without a legal right to care. These were babies that were gasping for air, their limbs were moving, they were crying, and there was no one to even pick them up and give them a cuddle. So they went from the place where they were safest in their mother's womb, induced alive, and then left to die on a metal kidney dish. And we know these 90 babies from the data released by Queensland Health, but we also know the story of Xantha, which I know you read into the Parliament the other day. So little baby Xantha, she was induced at 19 weeks at the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital just down the road. This was in 2020. And she was born alive unexpectedly. They dumped her on a metal kidney dish in an empty room where she lay for 7 minutes. So this is just one little Queensland baby girl that we know the story of because it was reported in the Courier Mail. But then it begs the question, those 90 newborns, what about them? What about their stories that we will never hear because they're just a statistic? So this bill is so important because it would introduce birth equality to Queensland and it would give legislative protection to all children. We know from the data that if a child survives an abortion, a late-term abortion, there was a study in the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology and it showed that 241 babies were killed that way, but half were born alive when feticide wasn't given. The average survival time was 32 minutes. One baby in that study survived for over 4 hours. So that shows you what we're talking about here in terms of the depth of pain and the time where that child is abandoned without any medical care rendered. The other point I want to make is that because of Stephen Miles's legacy as health minister, we now have more Queensland newborns in this predicament. In 2018, when Stephen Miles was health minister, he told the Parliament that there would not be an increase in late-term abortions through his bill introducing abortion after birth. It was a lie. In that year, before his bill was introduced, 152 Queensland newborns in that year, 152 Queensland newborns, In that year in 2018, there were 152 babies who were killed. They were gestationally viable, but they were killed through late-term abortion. We fast forward 3 years, and the most recent year we have data for, that number has doubled. So the number of late-term abortions has doubled, and that is Stephen Miles' legacy, and he needs to be held to account for that, because more late-term abortions means more gestationally viable babies lying on metal kidney dishes, struggling to breathe without a legislative protection to give them care. So that's why this bill is really important, and I thank you, Robbie, for your courage in introducing that and that of your party.
Sure, and just to simplify that again, simple people's terms, there is people alive. These are babies, they're people just like you and me. They're born there and they're planned abortions, but they're born alive on a table, viable baby, and we're denying them the chance to live the life that we've all lived. and that shouldn't happen in Queensland. And it's a pretty simple proposition. It's actually the new operating procedure they've adopted in Queensland. They changed the dead of the night. It just needs to be endorsed in legislation, and so they can never be changed back on a whim by the government of the day. So it's a very simple thing for Queenslanders to make a choice on, and well, there should be no choice at all. And people should be alive, should be kept alive, and not let to die in a dark room or in a medical waste bin.